Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in today's episode, we're going to be diving into a somewhat controversial program that has actually been going on for almost 25 years now to store nuclear waste in one of America's busiest oil fields, the Permian Basin. This story was one that I saw in the Wall Street Journal recently, and I didn't realize that this facility existed. And so I thought it'd be interesting for us to dive into, where this is located, how is it affecting oil and gas activity, and then, what is the issue here, if anything. So, Justin, did you know about this pilot plant, or have you heard about this before we dove into this episode?
No, this is my first time hearing about it. And, we've talked about before how big of an issue the storage of spent nuclear fuel is, but I did not know that there was already a test plant in West Texas.
Yeah, it seems like one of the biggest controversial things as it relates to nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, of course, which is the dark side of our ability to harness the atom. So we're going to dive into exactly what this facility is, where it's located, what it's used for, and then what are the plans and why is it creating some controversy? So, Justin, do you want to dive into what this Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP, is?
Yep, let's do it. So the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico is the world's third deepest geological repository licensed to store transuranic radioactive waste for 10,000 years. The storage rooms at the WIPP are 2,150 feet underground in a salt formation of the Delaware Basin. The waste is from the research and production of the United States nuclear weapons only. The plant started operation in 1999, and the project is estimated to cost $19 billion in total. So, Matt, this has been ongoing, and that's a lot of money that has been put into this.
Yeah, that is a lot of money. I guess on the bright side, it's spread out over 25 years. So it is, I guess, in perspective, it's not insane when you consider all of the controls that need to be in place for managing radioactive waste. But we dove into the Department of Energy's website where they talk about this plant, and they have some facts in there, and we'll cover that. And one thing that's important to note, I think, is that is designed to store TRU waste. So it's defense-generated TRU waste specifically. So they define TRU waste as clothing, tools, rags, residues, debris, soil, and other items contaminated with small amounts of plutonium and other man-made radioactive elements. And so it's interesting. This is basically radioactive waste that is not the plutonium triggers used in nuclear bombs or anything like that, but it's in the, I suppose, the dismantling and upgrading or, manufacturing of replacement nuclear weapons that this stuff is generated, and they need to store it somewhere. And so I understand that is what they say is stored there. Specifically, this facility is located in Lee County, New Mexico, which is near Carlsbad. And this is an area that is a hotbed of oil and gas activity right now. There is a ton of oil and gas drilling going on. And in fact, I looked at well database and looked at the wells that were there, existing horizontal wells as well as permits. And there's a lot of wells that are permitted all the way up to basically the fence line of this facility. And there are, I think, I counted 7 rigs running within just say a township of this particular facility. So it's definitely an area that's the epicenter of oil and gas activity, which could potentially be problematic from a seismic activity point of view. And we'll dive into that and talk about some of the pros and some of the cons and, what the potential issues are. And, when you look at this all in balance, is it really even an issue? And, the big issue, it seems, is the current plans by the company Holtec. And in this Wall Street Journal article, which we'll link to in the show notes, they mention that they are looking to create the world's largest nuclear waste storage facility there in the Delaware Basin. So we wanted to dive in because I think you read the headline, it is kind of alarming at first glance, but we'll dive into the details. Speaking of which, Justin, do you want to talk about some of the arguments for this particular facility?
Yeah, man, absolutely. So to kind of set the stage here, some of the key details. So Holtec wants to transport thousands of canisters of spent nuclear fuel to the site by rail. The facility would store the waste below ground. It has a 40-year license and could ultimately hold around 170,000 metric tons of used fuel. And some of the arguments for the supporters of the project argue that it could really help solve a decades-old problem in the nuclear energy sector. Currently, radioactive waste is piling up at reactor sites across the country because the U.S. has no permanent storage solution. And this is something we've talked about before with, needing to grow nuclear energy to be able to support our green initiatives. And the storage of that spent fuel is really a large concern. A centralized interim storage facility like the one proposed could consolidate waste from multiple sites. It'd make it easier to monitor and manage it. It reduced the financial burden on federal government, which is paying utilities billions to store waste on site, and potentially pave the way for expanded use of nuclear energy, which some see as crucial for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And Matt, the arguments against are just as strong. However, the project faces that significant opposition, particularly from the oil and gas industry that dominates that area in the Permian Basin. And some of their main concerns are safety and environmental risk. Critics worry that the potential for accidents during transport or storage of the waste, a nuclear incident in such a crucial energy producing region could really have devastating consequences. Economic impact. The Permian Basin produces more oil than Iraq and Libya combined. Any disruption to this production could have major implications for the U.S. energy sector and for that local economy. And then, Matt, as you mentioned, there's already a lot of production in that surrounding area. So some of the oil companies, including some of the giants like Exxon, have expressed concern that the facility could interfere with their drilling operations that are already ongoing.
Yeah, now that we have a significant amount of horizontal drilling going on in the Delaware Basin, which is if you think about the Permian, you think West Texas, this is sort of the western portion of that Permian Basin is where the Delaware, that sub-basin is located. And so that, I think, is why it's getting a lot of attention now. To put it in perspective, I think most of the formations that they're targeting in this area, you're closer to 10,000 feet. So, even if they were to drill horizontally underneath, I think they probably wouldn't, just because of concerns of seismicity or movement underground when they hydraulically fracture wells. So I think they would want to keep from drilling underneath the sites. But it's not impacting, from the looks of it, any fee minerals or any private mineral rights, because there is, appears to be drilling activity all the way up to the edge of where the federal minerals are located and where this site is located. And again, the area that is affected is New Mexico state owned. I don't believe they're fee minerals. But, I think that's probably the first question that comes to my mind, from a perspective of a mineral owner who owns minerals in the Permian, is this facility's proximity to oil and gas drilling going to affect my mineral rights? Are they going to limit drilling activity in order to prevent a disruption to this facility? And it doesn't appear that that's the case. So I think that from those fears, are, I think, unfounded to a certain extent. And I understand the operators' concerns that it could impact their operations, but it does seem like the state of New Mexico is allowing wells to be permitted and drilled around this area. Justin, like we were talking before we hit record, I think the big question in my mind is, how is this going to affect the ability to inject wastewater, inject produced water underground? Because I think data has shown in other areas, and even in fact, I think in the Permian, that can be a source of unwanted seismicity. If you inject water at too high of a rate, it can induce earthquakes because they're basically lubricating those faults underground. And so in my mind, Justin, I think that would be the question is, how is this going to impact the ability of operators to dispose of water in this area?
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And, something else this article highlights is this is just really one piece of the puzzle. This would be a short-term facility. And there's some concern from the opposition that, this could become a de facto long-term facility just because we don't have that next piece of the long-term storage figured out yet. Putting it in context, a plan to create a deep geological repository at Yucca Mountain in Nevada was abandoned in 2011 after years of controversy and billions of dollars spent. And that has left the country without a clear long-term plan for dealing with radioactive waste from its nuclear power plants and weapons programs. And Matt, another reason this area has been targeted is the Permian Basin already has some experience with this. We mentioned at the beginning of the show that the waste isolation pilot plant that already stores nuclear waste. It's been operating since 1999, and there was an accident in 2014. So I can imagine that is also raising some concern with the local area because it's really not too far in the distant past.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this article highlights the plan of this company, Holtec International, which is looking to store the spent nuclear fuel in Lee County in a new facility. So, Justin, like we've talked about this waste isolation pilot plant, which I think is important because it sort of sets the precedent, I think, for storage of nuclear waste in this area. It doesn't seem to have caused any issues for that particular facility. I'm not sure exactly what the plans are for this Holtec International facility, which is what this Wall Street Journal article talks about, that it could, in fact, be basically transporting used fuel rods and higher, more radioactive waste that it's looking to store about 170,000 metric tons of used fuel. And basically, that is a significant amount when you think about how much we actually store. It's actually twice as much as we currently hold. It would be the largest facility in the world, and it would further development of nuclear energy. So I think having a storage facility is important when we think about the future of energy and the need to have reliable, low carbon sources of energy. And nuclear power, to be honest, is really the only game in town from that standpoint. Wind and solar can never provide a reliable baseload power unless it has basically battery backups for when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining. So that's why nuclear reactors are so important, because they're very stable and very efficient. And so if we're looking to ramp up the nuclear renaissance, we need to have a place to store this stuff. And so, I think that the thing that's interesting, the siting of this will become very important, because you can look at putting it in a salt dome like this, which I think is a benefit. One of the things that this waste isolation pilot plant has going for it is that it is in a salt cavern, and there is some plasticity associated with that. So if there's movement into the earth, that will kind of move and mold to what happens around it. So to a certain extent, it can kind of isolate the nuclear waste from groundwater. So in my mind, Justin, I think the biggest concern is whatever facility needs to be completely isolated from groundwater, because if you get groundwater into these caverns and there were to be a release from one of the casks that's storing this waste, then that groundwater will get contaminated. And then you'd have this contaminated radioactive plume of groundwater migrating. It would be a disaster. It would be very hard to clean up. So in my mind, I think that's probably the biggest question mark with this new facility, is how are they isolating the storage facility from groundwater, and how would any minor seismicity, in other words minor earthquakes, potentially affect the integrity of the facility? Justin, what are some of the things that came to mind as you were reading about this?
You said it, Matt. I think there's a couple different angles. It's something you have to be very concerned with the safety and ensuring that procedures. And as we mentioned in the article, in 2014, there was a 3-year closure that raised a lot of questions about safety protocols. And so you've got a couple of aspects of, like you said, how are they isolating that from a physical standpoint? And then what are the procedures of the workers ensuring safety ongoing? Because that's something that can start at a high bar, but certainly slip down. And then there's a lot of concern from the oil and gas operators for good reason. They can't afford to take any risk in that area. And that would have a dramatic impact on operations in that area. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But like we've talked about, it really is a big issue with pushing nuclear power forward. We, quite a while ago now, Matt, had an episode that we did with Justin Hunn where he talked about some of the advancements, and that was episode 127 in nuclear energy. And there's been major advancements in small reactors and different things that can produce the energy in a safer way. However, it hasn't answered the question that's kind of on legislators to figure out how we're going to store this.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something we need to figure out. I know that if you think about the broader context of our nuclear waste storage challenge, U.S. has been struggling for decades to find a permanent solution for storing nuclear waste. Many listeners, you all may remember a site called Yucca Mountain in Nevada. And so that was, for a while, I think, seen as the place where we were going to store this stuff. But that was abandoned in 2011 after years of controversy and $1 billion of that were spent and has left the country without really a long-term plan for dealing with the radioactive waste from the nuclear power plants. And then to a lesser extent, I think probably the weapons program, since those are generally, not active anymore other than maintaining the existing arsenal. So you think about the Permian, they do have some experience. The geology might be favorable, but again, I think the biggest question, to your point, Justin, is we can't afford black eye on the oil and gas industry in causing like a nuclear incident from earthquakes. For me, I think there's a PR issue, probably more than a technical or safety issue per se. But, if there were nuclear waste to contaminate the groundwater because of an earthquake caused by oil and gas activity, then it would put another black eye on the oil and gas industry. And they certainly don't need that right now when there's a lot of pressure from environmentalists to shut down the industry, period, because of the carbon emissions. Last thing we need is a battle with the nuclear industry as well. I think we're sort of in the same boat when it comes to wanting to provide energy that is reliable and affordable to the world. And so I think to a certain extent, oil and gas operators and nuclear power plant operators need to work together to be on the same page and battling for that right. And that, so that we continue to enjoy that here in the Western world and like the United States, and we have reliable power. And anecdotally, I will say we have been experiencing a lot of power outages here in Colorado. And I don't know if that is just isolated or if it is Xcel Energy, which is the service provider here in Colorado, selecting parts of the state to take offline when they don't have enough capacity because they are making a big push to move towards renewables. And so I have a feeling that it's starting to impact our reliability. So without nuclear energy and without natural gas, that's going to be a very common occurrence because frankly, there's really no other way to have reliable baseload power other than those two, unless you're burning coal, which that is definitely not in favor. Justin, going forward, we talk about issues. Do you want to talk about some of the legal challenges and maybe what could transpire there? I know that article mentioned a little bit about sort of where they're at and, some legislation that was passed in New Mexico and Texas and potential lawsuits that are surrounding this facility.
So, Matt, there's been some legal challenges with this. So local ranchers have also notched some court victories with this. Last year, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans found that the federal law didn't authorize the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to license a private away from the reactor storage facility for spent nuclear fuel. It vacated the federal license for another storage project proposed by Interim Storage Partners, and which was a joint venture between Orano USA and Waste Control Specialists. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has asked the court to reconsider that decision. The Holtec project faces other hurdles. So New Mexico last year passed legislation all but banning storage of high-level nuclear waste. And then Texas lawmakers have also opposed interim storage facilities. The Holtec spokesperson said the company was evaluating legislation's impact on the project, and Fasken expects the fight over interim storage will eventually reach the Supreme Court. So, Matt, this will be an interesting legal battle as it goes. Some of the community leaders in southeast New Mexico have pushed to build the Holtec site, including Eddy and Lee counties, which together produce about 1.7 million barrels of oil a day. So there's a lot of back and forth going on. And, if we learn anything with the Nevada project, this is probably far from over. Holtec also mentioned that the project represents a $3 billion investment that'll create 400 jobs in that area. And of course, that they think that nuclear energy is the future and that this is an issue that needs to be solved. And, Matt, there's a lot of validity on both sides with this. It'll be really interesting to see because the track record of coming to the table and working together on this has not been great.
Yeah, it seems like these things take a really long time to get permitted and put into operation, if ever. The Yucca Mountain, to your point, I think is a good example of that. So I think it'll be something worth monitoring if you own minerals and royalties in the Permian Basin, whether in southeastern New Mexico or in West Texas. Definitely pay attention to this, learn about where they ultimately site this facility, if they move it or if they allow this to go in. I think it would be important to understand how it could impact any private mineral rights in the area. If they decide to put a perimeter around where this facility is and where they wouldn't allow oil and gas drilling, if there are any fee minerals or private minerals, in other words, in that area, it would be important to make sure that those mineral owners get paid fair market value for those interests so that a unconstitutional taking does not occur. So certainly something to pay attention to. But, I think it is important that we figure something out, whether it's in West Texas or some other place with less activity. I think that is, Yucca Mountain makes sense in my mind because it doesn't seem like there's really any energy development going on there, maybe aside from mining. And I'm not sure the proximity of that site where it was relative to any active mines, but certainly this is not the greatest idea in my mind if you're thinking about the potential for earthquakes and if that is a risk that you're wanting to manage with a facility like this. Oil and gas activity, while not super common, can cause earthquakes if it's not regulated properly. In other words, if they allow too much water to be injected into these saltwater disposal formations, then it can cause earthquakes to occur more frequently. So yeah, something to monitor, and we'll keep you updated as we hear about this project and if it moves forward and if they overturn some of that legislation that's blocking facilities like this from going in. But certainly an interesting plan to put nuclear waste in one of America's busiest oil fields.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, Matt. It is definitely an issue that needs to be solved. The question is this the right place? And if not, where is?
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, thanks again for listening. And as always, you can find links to the articles and resources we mentioned in the show notes, which can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com. Thanks again, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.